Baruch she'achyono v'kiyamano v'higiyano lizman hazeh. Blessed is the Almighty who brought us to this day. Look what's happening. We are finally, at long last, shooting a weekly Torah portion class right here in the redesigned, reconfigured, refurbished Soulword Studios. Just gorgeous. If you're listening on a podcast platform, by the way, I know there are a lot of people who consume our content that way, which is wonderful, especially those who the functionality of a podcast platform is particularly conducive to the way they consume content. A lot of people listen to it on the go. But I highly recommend, at least for this class, come take a peek. Come to our website, soulwords.org, and check out this week's episode just to see the background and see this environment that we created, this very highly curated atmosphere of Torah and Chassidus, and every little detail in the background, by the way, has a deep meaning and is helping to create an atmosphere where the look of everything is like attuned to the messaging that we try to bring you in all of our classes. It's sort of, this is a combination of what we call in Kabbalah oir and kli, of light and vessel. So the room has become like the perfect vessel to contain the lights that we're trying to put out with Hashem's help. Anyways, again, if you're listening on a podcast platform, come to soulwords.org. And by the way, in general, if you're listening to podcast platforms, come to soulwords.org and see we have thousands of hours of videos. I know a lot of times when you're on the podcast platforms, you only see some of our classes, or it's not as well organized or not so searchable. Come to soulwords.org and you have thousands of hours of classes. Everything is so easily navigatable and searchable. And we have classes on everything. So please come check it out. Also, by the way, if you're on YouTube, a lot of people see us on YouTube. Or Torah Anytime is another big platform. A lot of people see us on Torah Anytime. And they don't know about soulwords.org. I'm encouraging you. That's our virtual home, soulwords.org. We're very happy for you to consume content wherever works for you. But come to the website and sign up for our email or subscribe to our WhatsApp. That way we can stay in touch with you. So all that info is there on the soulwords.org homepage. You can sign up for the email, and you can also subscribe to the WhatsApp. That info is there on the homepage. And also, I want to mention, as long as we're doing business over here, once a year we do a fundraiser. And coming up this Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, we are beginning 2 nights of live streaming. We're going to do Motzei Shabbos and Sunday night, both evenings, a live stream program with lots of great Torah content and music and fun and guests and questions and answers and all types of stuff. And most important, we're raising money. We're raising our budget for the year. And that's going to be at charity.com, charity with a D, charity.com/RST, like Rabbi Shei's Tal. Okay, fine. Business is out of the way. Let's jump into the learning. But, we start with our Milsa B'dichos, so we start with our little joke. By the way, everyone noticed, the jokes are not necessarily funny. I do not pride myself to say that I tell funny jokes, but the joke is always zum Zach, like we say in Yiddish. Okay, so here's the joke. A guy's sitting with his therapist, and he says, "Oh, my wife is constantly telling me I don't listen. At least I think she's saying something like that." See, that was a perfect example. It was not hilarious, but you're going to see it's zum Zach. It's really, it fits. I'll tell you, if you don't like that joke, I got another one on the same topic. Guy is talking to his therapist. He says, "So yesterday my wife comes up to me and she says, 'Are you even listening to me?' I thought that was a very strange way to start a conversation." Okay. Anyway, you're going to see why this... Okay. This week's Parasha, Parasha's Vayetze. What happens? First pasuk, first verse. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva. Yaakov, Jacob, left Beersheva. Beersheva is the city where he was living, a city in southern land of Israel. Vayelech Charana, and he went to Haran. Haran is a city in a region in Asia Minor where he was sent to go find a bride. He was sent by his mother, Rebecca, because his brother Esau was going to kill him. She said, "Get out of here and also go find a wife in Haran." Okay, fine. That's the beginning of this week's Parsha. 5 verses earlier, meaning this is the first verse of this Parsha, so if we're going 5 verses earlier, we're going to the end of last week's Parsha, Parsha's Toldos. So let's go to the end of last week's Parsha, 5 verses earlier, and what do we have? It says, Vayishlach Yitzchok es Yankiv. Yitzchok, Isaac, the father, sent Yankiv, Jacob, the son. Vayelech Padena Aram, and he went to Padan Aram. You see the contradiction here. Not necessarily contradiction, but the discrepancy here. This is describing the same journey. When it says that Yitzchok sent Yankiv to Padan Aram, and then 5 verses later it says Yankiv left Beersheba and went to Haran, it's the same journey. Why is it 5 verses apart? Because there was a little parenthetical narrative about Esav. Rashi explains why it broke up the story. Because they sent him away. He had to leave anyways because he had to get away from Esav so he wouldn't get killed. Why specifically we sent to Haran? Because they had relatives, mishpacha there, that they wanted to maybe make a shidduch with, because they didn't want him to marry with the Canaanite girls. So then all of a sudden, the Chumash takes a detour and says, by the way, when Esav saw that Yankiv wasn't supposed to marry a Canaanite girl, so he also knew he wasn't supposed to marry a Canaanite girl, and he married one of Yishmael's daughters. And it talks about that. It's like a little side point, and then he gets back to the story, returning to where we left off. And it says, Vayetzi Yankiv, Jacob left Beersheba and he went to Haran. But that's the same exact journey. It's described twice. It's like returning back to the action. Okay. But you notice, in the first instance, when it says Yitzchok sent Yankiv, it only says where he went to, Padan Aram. That's the destination. The second time, when we review the story, it says Vayetze Yankiv mi Beersheva. He left Beersheva and he went to Haran. So the first time it only tells you where he went to, not where he left from. The second time it tells you not only where he went to, but where he left from. See the discrepancy. So I know that's probably not the most intriguing question. I'm sure that if you didn't get an answer to that, it wouldn't keep you up at night. But here's what I want to tell you. The answer to that question, or the reconciliation of that little discrepancy, actually holds within it a secret about the successful family life, marriage, and home life of Yaakov Avinu. One of the things it says about Yaakov Avinu is mitos shlema, that his bed was complete. The bed here is a euphemism for procreation. All of his progeny followed in his ways. So you have Avram, who had Yitzchak, but he also had Yishmael, who went his own way. And you have Yitzchak, who had Yaakov, but he also had an Esav, who went his own way. But Yaakov had 12 sons, and they all followed in his ways. So he's called mitos shlema. He has that accomplishment that he kept his family intact. So what can we learn about having a strong family from Yaakov Avinu that will be revealed by understanding that interesting little discrepancy of why the first time the journey is described, it only says where he went to, not where he left from. And the second time, it says both where he went to and where he left from. Okay. You with me? Yeah? Probably distracted by all the beautiful stuff in the background. You're like looking at the Chayach album, and you're looking at the Masada chart. It's an interesting history about the Masada chart. There's so much history in this room. There's a lot of interesting stuff. The Tanya map, I don't know if you can see it, maybe it's off screen. But there's so much cool stuff in this room. Okay, anyway, back to our lesson. Let's dig a little bit deeper. There's another discrepancy here. And that is, the first time the journey is described, actually, if you noticed, it describes the destination as Padan Aram. And the second time this journey is described, it describes the destination as Haran. Now, that's not a contradiction, because Haran is in Padan Aram. Haran is the city, Padan Aram is the region. It's like saying, he went to Chicago. Oh, you told me you went to Illinois. No, Chicago is in Illinois. Or like we used to say, just outside Chicago, there's a place called Illinois. Ever heard that before? Anyways, but actually that's very similar to this because Chodon is like the metropolis, and like Paddan Aram is a rural area. Paddan actually literally means field. Rashi says Paddan means field. So it was the field of Aram, and it was like a rural agricultural area, which you're going to understand in a second why it's described that way. In terms of Yaakov Avinu's life, these two terms, even though they're not mutually exclusive, and like I said, Chodon is the city, Paddan Aram is the region, the nuance of city and field, let's call it, represent two different areas of Yaakov Avinu's life. Paddan Aram, let's talk about that first because that's how it's described first. It says Yitzchak sent Yaakov to Paddan Aram. Paddan Aram, like we said, means the field of Aram, and it's literally a field, or it's a whole plain. It's like many fields. It's a rural area, and what did Yaakov use that area for? For grazing. Remember, he was a shepherd, a very successful one. He had a whole big enterprise working for his father-in-law who tried to swindle him. That's another story. But Yaakov succeeded, and he was a very, very successful shepherd. He had flocks and flocks of sheep. So that all took place in those fields. So when we talk about Paddan Aram, we're talking about the field, we're talking about his job, which is also, when we say in English, like, what field are you in? It also means your job, your line of work, your career. By the way, do you know why the Scarecrow won a Nobel Prize? He was outstanding in his field. Okay, anyways, so Paddan Aram means the field, and that was Yaakov's field, his field of work, literally the field where he was a shepherd, where he made his money with flocks of sheep. Okay, Chodon is the city. Chodon is the city. The city is where he lived. You know, like some people, like they live in the city and then they commute to work to some suburb or something. So Yaakov Avinu was like, he lived in the city. He lived in Chodon. That's where his house was. That's where his family was. That's where his wives and his children lived. So Chodon represents the home life. That's his home life. You know, it's interesting. I was thinking, one of the security questions that they ask you, it's a common security question, is what city did you meet your spouse in? How do they know it was a city? Maybe it was some unincorporated rural area, but they're right, it's a city. But I'm not telling you what city I met my wife in because you're all going to go hack me. So I'm also not going to tell you the color of my first car. Okay, anyways. Or the first name of my first boss at my first job. Okay, anyway. So Paddan Aram is the field where Yaakov worked as a shepherd. Chodon is the city where he met his wives, raised his family, and lived with his family. Okay? So, in other words, let's break it up like this. Paddan Aram is work. Chodon is home. So you have work and you have home. Work and home. Okay? Once you understand this, the whole thing makes sense. It starts to make sense. How is it possible that Yaakov Avinu could have left where he was without really leaving? You know what I mean by that? That physically he went on a journey, he relocated, but he didn't really leave where he physically left from. And the answer is very simple. The Baal Shem Tov told us that b'makim shel ritzonei shel adam sham hu nimtza kulai. In the place where a person desires, there he is entirely, not even a part of him, but entirely. So wherever your desire is, that's where you, the real you really, maybe your body is here. You ever sit across from somebody? Physically, they're sitting across from you, but they've checked out. Emotionally unavailable. Maybe they got one of these in front of their face, a little piece of plastic, and it's taking them thousands of miles away. Okay? So it is possible to physically be in one place, to have relocated physically, but not to have relocated mentally, emotionally, spiritually. When it says, Vayishlach Yitzchak, talking about the end of last week's Parasha, Yitzchak sent Yankov. He sent Jacob. V'yelech Padana Aram, and he went to Padan Aram. It only says where he sent him to. It doesn't say where he left from. You want to know why it doesn't say where he left from? Because he never left. He never left. He went to Padan Aram. Padan Aram means his field, his job, where he went to work. So when Yaakov Avinu was sent to go to work, he went to work, but he never left Beersheba. He never left the home of his holy, beloved father Yitzchak. He was still with Yitzchak. He never checked out. You know what that means? You know what it means to say, oh, he phoned it in. He phoned it in, right? He phoned it in. He didn't even show up. He wasn't even here. He phoned it in. It's an idiom. But it means he wasn't there with his whole heart. He wasn't there with his whole presence. That's exactly what we're describing, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. When it comes to making a living, when it comes to earning your livelihood, there's a saying. Yegia kapecha kiseichel ashrecha v'tevloch. It's from Tehillim. You'll eat from the toil of your hands. You'll be fortunate. It'll be good for you. And our sages say, ashrecha means in this world, good, fortunate for you in this world. V'tevloch, and it'll be good for you in the world to come. It'll be materially and spiritually beneficial for you if you eat from the toil of your hands. What does that mean? Everyone has to be a manual laborer? No. It means there's a yegia kapecha, toil of your hands, meaning your external faculties. Hands here means your external faculties, as opposed to yegia maichai, v'libai, where you're working your mind and your heart. When you have to work, you have to work, but only immerse your external faculties. Don't put your mind and heart into it. There's a story, there was a guy back in Russia before the revolution. He had a galoshes factory, and he was fairly wealthy. Manufacturing, made galoshes. So he went to Lubavitch, the town of Lubavitch, for Shabbos. He spent Shabbos with the Rebbe Rashab, and he was preoccupied with his business the whole Shabbos, because he was the balabos, he was the owner of the factory, so he was thinking about his galoshes factory the whole time. And the Rebbe Rashab recognized this, and he said to the guy, he says, it's funny, I've seen plenty of people with their feet in their galoshes. This is the first time I'm seeing somebody with his head in his galoshes. Put his head in his galoshes, put his head into his work, right? So what we want to do is when we want to go to work, we want to phone it in. We want to phone it in. Yagia kapecha, the toil of your hands, meaning the toil of your external faculties. Save your mind and heart for more precious things. So in that case, when we're talking about Yaakov leaving Beersheba to go to Padan Aram to work, he went to Padan Aram, but he didn't really leave Beersheba. He spiritually, emotionally, mentally remained in Beersheba with his father Yitzchak the whole time. In contrast, when we're talking about family life, when we're talking about Yaakov Avinu building his home, the future 12 tribes, his 12 sons, then we say, V'yetze Yaakov mi Beersheba. He left Beersheba and then came to Haran. He left Beersheba and then came to Haran. He did check out of where he had been, because when it comes to the home, you have to be 100% fully present. And it's interesting also, because if you think about it, Beersheba is a holy place. It's actually one of the holy cities of the land of Israel. And Haran is a really, really unholy place. Rashi tells us, Haran means Chareinei Afshel Mokim. It's a place that's so corrupt that it made Hashem angry, so to speak. It kindled the wrath of Hashem. So we're talking about, he was in Beersheba, which is a holy place, with his holy father, with Yitzchak. And he went to Haran, which is a corrupt, lewd, licentious place. And yet we're told he checked out from where he had been and fully put himself into where he had arrived. Why? Even though he was leaving a holy place and going to a corrupt place, because when it comes to family, when it comes to marriage, you cannot be in two places at once. You must be completely present. The first marriage, the first intimate relationship we have in Torah is Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. And over there it says, Adam Yoda es Chava. Adam knew Eve. What does it mean? He knew her. Like he could pick her out of a lineup. He could say, "Oh yeah, I recognize that woman. She was the only woman." Of course, he could recognize her. He knew her means he was intimate with her. He really knew her. He knew her deeply. They say that the word intimacy in English is code for into me see. Intimacy is into me see into me, like see who I am, see the real me. And the word for that in Hebrew, in the Holy Tongue, is das. V'yoda eschava. Yoda means das. The verb is v'yoda, the past tense, but the noun is das. Das means the ability to attach and focus deeply to something. It talks about it in chapter 3 of Tanya, that a person can have lots of chokhmah, meaning he can know a lot. And he could even have a lot of bina. He could explain it well. But if he doesn't have das, das means his kashrus, connection, focus, then it's all academic. It'll never give birth to emotions. The way it's described in Tanya is that intellect gives birth to emotions. But you have chokhmah, which is the father, and bina, which is the mother. But if the father and the mother aren't intimate, so it doesn't give birth to emotions. So what's the intimacy between the father and the mother, intellectual father and mother, chokhmah and bina, is das. The intimate relationship between them is called das. So whenever you have the idea of focus, of really, really putting your mind and your full attention on something, we call that das, and the metaphor for that is intimacy. Is yichud, is union, specifically marital union. It's interesting that when you talk about a field, remember we're speaking about the field as being the byword for your work life. It is actually forbidden, according to Jewish law, for one to be intimate. I'm talking about actual literal marital intimacy in a field. It's not modest, obviously, right? And on a deeper level, it's also, for the same reason, so this explains, it's forbidden to pray in a field. You're not supposed to pray in an open place. It's not conducive to awe of heaven. So why are you not supposed to pray in an open place? So Chassidus explains on a deeper level, because just like you're not allowed to be intimate in a field, so too you're not allowed to pray in a field, because prayer is also intimacy. Prayer is, tefillah means connection, intimate connection with Hashem. So you can't have intimacy, you can't have das, you can't have deep focus and concentration in a field. Not only you can't, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. When you're in the field, meaning when you're at the work site, just show up with your hands, with your external faculties. As opposed to the exact opposite, when you're at home, now show up with your mind, your heart, your soul, not just your body. Be there completely for your spouse and for your children. Don't phone it in. When it comes to work, phone it in. When it comes to home life, don't phone it in. And that's the secret here. When it says that Yaakov went to Paddan Aram, it only says where he went to. It never says he left Beersheba, because every moment that Yaakov was in Paddan Aram, meaning the actual Paddan, the actual field, doing his shepherding stuff, he was with Yitzchak in Beersheba. He hadn't left Beersheba. When he was out working, so he was watching the sheep, he was doing whatever he had to do. He was a very responsible worker, this we know. He was very responsible, and he was successful. But he didn't immerse himself in it. He was, in his will, in his desire, he was still back in Beersheba. But the moment he went home, into the city, into Choron, where his wives and children lived, bam, all of a sudden, he left Beersheba. Each and every time he walked through the door, he left Beersheba, and he was fully present where he was. Even though it was a Choron, it was a corrupt, contemptible place. But that's how important it is to be present for one's family. And that's why, of all the Aves, of all the patriarchs, we see that Yaakov is the one who is extolled with this virtue of mitase shlema. He had an intact family, because it's with Yaakov Avinu that we see the secret of the dichotomy of the double standard, the desirable double standard of not being fully present when it comes to your your work, but being 100% present when it comes to home life. So how about a little homework? No pun intended. Or, yeah, maybe why not? Pun intended. Little homework. Question is the emphasis on the word home or the emphasis on the word work? The emphasis is on the word home. Here's some work that we can do at home. You know how people talk about, they went into Yechidus with the Lubavitcher Rebbe and they felt like they were the only person in the whole world, or even people who only got to see the Rebbe for a second at dollars, and they had that 1 second of eye to eye, and they said they felt completely seen to their core. It's a common experience people report. How would you like to be that to the best of your ability for your loved ones? How would you like to be able to look at your spouse, at your children, so deeply and so completely, with such focus and attention and presence, that they feel completely seen? And ask yourself that if you would make a point of doing that for every member of your household every day, how different the energy in the home might be. So let's leave wherever it is that we find interesting right now. Even if it's a Beersheva, even if it's a holy place, let's leave it behind right now. And let's go wherever our families are, even if it's a choron, and be completely present there. And Hashem should bless us with marital harmony, tranquility, peace in the home, nachas from our children, and our children should have nachas from us. Again, thanks for joining us in the Soul Word Studio, and God willing, we'll see you at the live stream, the annual Department of Redundance Department. Repetitive redundancy. We're going to see you at the live stream, Motzei Shabbos and Sunday, at charity.com/RST, charity with a D.com/RST. And again, check out soulwords.org. Okay. Thanks for joining us in the new studio. Hope you like it. And God willing, we're going to bring you a lot more content from here.